The first morning it happened, I remember standing in my driveway in a pressed blue shirt, coffee steaming in my left hand, and feeling that sharp kick in my stomach when I saw the black Ford Explorer angled across the mouth of my drive. The tires cut across the concrete like a taunt, and the chrome grille glinted in the early Dallas sun as if daring me to complain. My neighbor's car, again, sitting right where it should not be, and I was already 20 minutes late for a quarterly sales meeting downtown. The absurd part was that it was not even the first time. This had become a pattern, and I had told myself to be patient, to keep things civilized. But that morning something in me started to crack, because in America, owning a home is supposed to mean a little patch of freedom, a driveway where your car belongs, a strip of grass that you mow, a piece you pay for with 30 years of mortgage checks. And here stood this violation, this reminder that not everybody respects the unwritten code. I set my coffee on the hood of my own Silverado and marched across the lawn, cutting through the dew, my shoes already soaked. The Explorer belonged to Derek and Sandy Miller, the so-called neighbors from hell, who had moved in 2 houses down only a year before. They were younger than me, early 30s, loud, and had a revolving door of cousins, friends, and overnight guests who seemed to think the whole block was theirs. Their backyard had 3 half-broken trampolines, 2 pit bulls chained to sagging posts, and a half-finished deck that looked like it would collapse under its own nails. I had seen them drinking Bud Light tall boys at 9 in the morning on a Sunday, blasting bass so heavy it rattled my living room picture frames. But all of that, I had told myself, was their business. What pushed me over was the driveway, my driveway, turned into their personal overflow lot. I knocked hard on their front door. Sandy answered in a bathrobe, cigarette dangling from her lips, eyeliner smudged like she had not slept. "Yeah," she said, flat and already annoyed. I kept my voice polite, measured, the way my father had taught me back in Kansas, where you never picked fights with neighbors unless you had no choice. "Your car is blocking me in. I've got to get to work. Could you move it, please?" She rolled her eyes, shouted something behind her shoulder, and slammed the door. 10 seconds later, Derek stumbled out barefoot, his hair sticking up like a scarecrow. He jingled the keys, muttered something about how I should relax, and moved the Explorer 2 feet to the left, still hugging the curb too close to my drive. "There," he grunted, climbing back inside without looking at me. No apology, not even a nod. I was already late, my shirt clung with sweat, and my patience felt like it had been mugged in the alley. That was the start. Over the next few weeks, it became routine. Every couple of days, one of their cars, or their cousins or their friends, would block my driveway. Sometimes only half a bumper, just enough that backing out required a 10-point maneuver that made me look like I had never driven a truck in my life. Other times, full blockage, like a wall. I tried the notes first, the classic suburban American solution. Yellow sticky notes with smiley faces. "Please don't block the driveway. Thanks." Then more serious. "This is a fire hazard. I cannot get out." I left them tucked under the wipers, neat, folded. Every single one vanished, and the blocking continued. My wife, Rebecca, suggested we talk to them again, maybe invite them over for coffee, but the thought of having them in my kitchen made my stomach turn. My teenage son Ethan begged me to just ignore it, saying confrontation only made things worse. But I could not ignore it. Every blocked morning felt like an insult carved into the concrete I paid for. There is a particular American frustration that builds not from dramatic crimes, but from the small, constant violations that chip at your dignity. A blocked driveway, a barking dog at 3 a.m., trash bins left to roll in the street. They do not make headlines, but they gnaw at you until you lie awake staring at the ceiling fan, replaying the day's indignities like a broken tape. I started to notice how my hands trembled when I reached for the keys. I caught myself driving faster, angrier, once I finally did make it out. And every time I passed their house, the peeling paint, the sagging blinds, I felt the word repeating in my mind like a drumbeat. Bad neighbors, bad neighbors, bad neighbors. One Saturday, I tried again to be civil. I saw Derek in his yard tinkering with a rusted grill, smoke rising even though no food was cooking. I walked over, extended a hand, forced a smile. "Listen," I said, "I do not want this to become a big issue, but the cars, my driveway, this cannot keep happening. Can we figure something out?" Derek wiped his hand on a greasy rag, smirked, and said, "Man, it's just a driveway. Chill out. You act like you're the king of the block." Then he laughed, that low, mocking laugh that made me want to swing. I clenched my fists and walked away, hearing him call after me, "See you at the next block party, Sheriff?" That night, I could not eat. Rebecca rubbed my shoulder, said, "Maybe we should call the homeowners association." But deep down, I already knew how that would go. The HOA was notorious for citing people over grass length and mailbox color, but when it came to actual conflict, they vanished like smoke. Still, I wrote a formal complaint, typed it neat, attached photos of the blocked drive, and dropped it at the association office. 2 weeks later, I got a polite form letter back. "We appreciate your concern, but parking violations are not within the association's enforcement jurisdiction. In other words, good luck." I tried the police next. The non-emergency line put me on hold for 30 minutes. Then a tired voice explained that unless the car was on my actual property, they could not do much. The city had bigger problems. I hung up, staring at the kitchen wall, feeling the uselessness creep into my bones. My driveway, my problem, and no one cared. The emotional toll deepened. Rebecca started leaving for work earlier, afraid of being trapped. Ethan missed basketball practice because we could not get the car out in time. Even our daughter Lily, only 10, asked why the neighbors hated us. I told her they did not hate us, they just did not care. And maybe that was worse, because hatred at least acknowledges you exist, while disregard makes you invisible in your own home. I began snapping at the kids, at Rebecca, at myself. My chest felt heavy, like each day carried an extra load of bricks. I looked at the American flag hanging from my porch, faded but proud, and wondered what freedom really meant if you could not even park in your own driveway. By late spring, I knew something had to change. The polite notes, the handshakes, the HOA letters, all had failed. What lay ahead, I could not yet see, but I felt the stirrings of a battle I had not chosen yet, could not avoid. The bad neighbors had crossed a line, and in America, when someone violates your property, your time, your dignity, the fight is not just about concrete and asphalt. It is about principle. As I closed the blinds that night, watching their Explorer once again inch across the curb toward my driveway, I realized this would not end with another sticky note. This would end with a war, fought not with fists, but with something far sharper. It did not take long before the driveway battles began to seep into every corner of my family's life. What had started as an occasional irritation hardened into a daily siege, like the Miller family had drawn a private chalk line on the pavement and dared me to cross it. Their Ford Explorer was the worst offender, but it was never just that vehicle. Sometimes it was their cousin's Dodge Charger, its muffler so loud it set off car alarms. Other times it was an ancient Honda Civic with a broken taillight, crammed with fast food wrappers, parked sideways like someone had thrown dice and let the car land where it may. Each morning, I looked out the front window with a quiet dread, wondering if I was going to be able to back out like a normal citizen, or if I was going to spend 20 minutes knocking on doors, begging for access to my own driveway. The emotional erosion was subtle but relentless. Rebecca, usually calm and steady, began snapping when she could not get to work on time. She taught elementary school 15 minutes away, and punctuality mattered. "This is insane," she told me one Tuesday morning, as we stood in the kitchen, both of us staring at the Explorer blocking us in again. "I spend all day teaching kids about respect, and then I come home to grown adults who cannot manage basic decency." Her voice cracked, and I felt the sharp pang of guilt for failing her, as if it were my personal weakness that allowed this situation to continue. Ethan, our 16-year-old, started refusing to drive himself anywhere. He had just gotten his license, but he hated the humiliation of trying to back out with the neighbors' cars pressed against our driveway. "Everyone laughs at me," he said after one particularly awkward attempt. "They think I don't know how to drive. It's embarrassing." I wanted to tell him it was not his fault, that bad neighbors were like a disease in suburbia, spreading misery just because they could, but the words felt hollow. Lily, only 10, asked me one night if the Millers were bullies. "Why don't you tell the teacher?" she said, her child's mind grasping for the framework she knew. I swallowed hard and told her adults do not get teachers. Adults get lawyers. And yet even as we suffered, the Millers thrived in their arrogance. They treated the street like their personal theater. Derek strutted shirtless in cargo shorts, shouting into his phone, while Sandy smoked on the porch and laughed whenever I tried to reason with them. They hosted parties that spilled out onto the street, cars lining both curbs, the bass so strong that Lily's trophies rattled on her bookshelf. When I confronted Derek during one of these parties, asking if he could move a car that was blocking my driveway, he leaned close, beer in hand, and said, "Relax, man. You act like you own the street. Newsflash, roads are public." The other guests laughed, a chorus of derision, and I stood there burning with shame. That humiliation lit something inside me, something I had not felt since my 20s. I started documenting every incident like a detective building a case. I took photos of every blocked moment, time-stamped with the Dallas morning sun casting long shadows across the hood of their Explorer. I recorded videos on my phone, narrating calmly, March 14th, 7:52 a.m., driveway blocked again, unable to leave for work. I kept a folder on my laptop labeled Miller's Evidence. At night, while Rebecca read in bed, I pored over the files, scrolling through pictures of bumpers and taillights, proof of the indignities we endured. I tried calling the city again, this time armed with my evidence. The clerk on the line sounded sympathetic, even impressed, but explained once more that as long as the vehicles were on the street and not my private driveway slab, enforcement was tricky. "Sir," she said, "you might consider small claims court, but police resources are stretched thin." I thanked her and hung up, my jaw tight. Small claims court for blocked driveways. What had my life become? Rebecca begged me not to lose myself in it. "Michael, they want you angry. That's their power. Don't give it to them." But it was already too late. Every morning, the first thing I did was pull back the blinds to see if I had been blocked in again. Sometimes I found a clear drive and felt a rush of relief, like I had won a prize, only to spiral into fury when the blockage returned the next day. They had turned my home into a lottery of freedom. It all came to a breaking point one April morning. I had an important client presentation, one that could make or break my quarter's numbers. I woke early, dressed sharp, and rehearsed my talking points as I sipped coffee. When I stepped outside, briefcase in hand, the driveway was blocked completely by a massive Dodge Ram truck. I recognized it as Derek's brother's vehicle, the one with mud splattered across its sides and a Confederate flag decal on the back window. I banged on the Miller's door until my fists ached, but no one came. I called their phone, no answer. Time ticked away, the minutes melting into dread. Finally, I climbed into my Silverado and attempted to inch my way out, scraping the side of my truck against their bumper in the process. By the time I reached the highway, sweat poured down my back and my hands trembled on the wheel. I arrived 40 minutes late to the meeting, flustered and humiliated, and lost the account to a competitor. That night, I sat in the dark garage, staring at the scratches on my truck, and something in me snapped. I realized then that this was not just inconvenience. This was war, an undeclared suburban conflict in which the weapons were cars, curbs, and smug grins. The Millers were bad neighbors in the truest American sense. Not violent criminals, not lawbreakers in the traditional sense, but destroyers of peace, vandals of dignity. And the tragedy was that the system, the police, the HOA, even polite conversation had failed me. The emotions hardened into resolve. I remembered something my grandfather used to say when dealing with petty tyrants at the factory. You don't beat them by yelling louder. You beat them by knowing the rules better than they do. That night, I opened my laptop and began reading Texas municipal codes, insurance clauses, HOA bylaws, and even obscure federal transportation regulations. I sat there until 2 in the morning, surrounded by printouts and highlighters, as if preparing for a trial only I knew was coming. When Rebecca found me asleep at the table the next morning, she shook her head but did not stop me. She knew this had gone beyond annoyance. This was about reclaiming something stolen from us. Ethan started avoiding the house altogether, staying late at basketball practice. Lily tiptoed around my moods. The family was fraying, and the Millers' laughter from down the street sounded like victory drums. The escalation had transformed me from a neighbor into a soldier, one who carried a smartphone camera instead of a rifle, one who prepared with statutes instead of bullets. And though I could not yet see how, I knew the next phase would not be about sticky notes or polite knocks. It would be about leveraging the full weight of the American machine, law, finance, insurance, bureaucracy, against those who thought they could block me without consequence. The fight had only begun, and it would not be settled in the street. It would be settled on paper, in courtrooms, in city offices, in the places where power hides behind signatures and stamps. The bad neighbors had awakened something they could not control, and while they laughed and parked as if they owned the block, I was already drafting my counterattack, one regulation at a time. I used to think the American legal system was a slow-moving beast, good only for courtroom dramas on television or divorce lawyers with golf memberships. But as I sat in my dining room surrounded by printouts, I began to see it differently. It was not a beast. It was an arsenal. 1,000 little statutes, codes, bylaws, and insurance clauses just waiting to be aimed at someone foolish enough to laugh at them. The Millers had turned my driveway into their parking lot. Fine. I would turn America's paper machinery into my weapon. The first step was municipal code. I discovered that Dallas County had ordinances on obstruction of access, written in dry legalese that most people would skim right past. But buried in those paragraphs were words that mattered. Any obstruction that prevents ingress or egress from private property shall be considered a violation subject to fines not less than $250 per occurrence, not less than $250. I highlighted it, circled it, printed it twice. Then I called the city traffic division and, with the patience of a man who had been wronged too many times, explained that my neighbors were in violation of this statute almost daily. The clerk yawned, told me they would look into it, and probably forgot me the second she hung up. But I had planted a seed. Next came insurance. I called my own company first, asking what liability exposure existed if I could not get out of my driveway during an emergency. The agent perked up immediately. If emergency access is blocked, it can affect coverage. Fire trucks, ambulances, liability for damages. Yes, this is significant. That word, significant, was music to my ears. Then I asked her to document my concerns in my file, with dates and times. Now it was not just me complaining. Now there was a record with a billion-dollar corporation. Insurance companies do not forget. They do not forgive. They count risks, and when they count, people like the Millers usually lose. The HOA had already shrugged me off, but I was not done with them either. I found in the bylaws a clause about nuisance behaviors that disrupted community harmony. It was vague, but vagueness is a lawyer's playground. I printed photos of the blocked drive, highlighted the clause, and mailed copies not just to the association, but to every member of the board. I imagined them sitting in their kitchens, opening envelopes full of bumper photos, sighing, and realizing they could no longer pretend the problem was invisible. Meanwhile, the Millers carried on as if nothing had changed. Their cars still straddled my driveway like defiant soldiers. Derek still smirked when I passed. Sandy still smoked on her porch with that smudged eyeliner. But what they did not see was the invisible web tightening around them. I was not just a neighbor anymore. I was a bureaucratic spider, spinning threads through city offices, insurance files, and HOA committees. And maybe it was the late nights, maybe it was the exhaustion, but I started to see patterns where none existed. I would be reading traffic ordinances at 2 in the morning and suddenly wonder, who wrote these codes? Who benefits when fines are paid? What if there was a secret council of suburban regulators, shadowy figures in fluorescent-lit basements, deciding which neighbor gets crushed and which one gets ignored? I laughed at myself, shook my head, and poured another coffee, but the thought lingered. What if the Millers were not just sloppy neighbors? What if they were pawns in some bigger game, some conspiracy to test how much indignity a middle-class American would endure before breaking? The more I thought about it, the funnier it became. I imagined Derek as a sleeper agent for the Department of Driveway Chaos, assigned to torment me until I cracked. I pictured Sandy reporting to a federal unit that measured suburban stress levels by counting sticky notes left on windshields. Maybe their broken trampolines were really antennae, transmitting data back to Washington. It was absurd, of course, but absurdity kept me sane. Still, my actions were anything but a joke. I began filing official complaints. I submitted a report to the City Code Enforcement Division, attaching my photos and citing the exact ordinance. I filed a claim with my insurance company, naming the Millers' vehicles as repeated hazards. I even mailed a certified letter to the Texas Department of Transportation, requesting clarification on blocked driveway statutes. Every envelope I sent was like a small missile launched into the heart of the bureaucracy, and then the letters started to come back. First, a notice from the city. We have received your complaint. An officer will be dispatched to investigate. Then, a letter from my insurance company. Your concerns have been noted. A review of neighborhood risk factors may be conducted. Finally, a curt email from the HOA president. The board is aware of the situation. We are considering options. I almost laughed out loud reading that last one. Considering options. In suburbia, that is code for, we are about to cover our backsides. Meanwhile, the Millers kept parking like kings, but small cracks appeared in their confidence. One afternoon, I saw Derek arguing with a city officer on the curb, waving his arms as the officer took notes. Another day, I overheard Sandy complaining on her phone about ridiculous letters from insurance. They did not know yet how many fronts this war had, but they were beginning to sense it. At night, lying awake, I felt a strange mix of triumph and paranoia. Triumph, because my strategy was working. Paranoia, because I could not shake the feeling that maybe I was playing into a bigger machine. The federal government loves compliance. Insurance companies thrive on fines and premiums. HOA boards crave authority. By unleashing them on the Millers, had I also unleashed them on myself? The thought kept me restless, and soon my imagination spiraled again. What if the Millers were not the real enemy? What if they were bait, planted to lure me into the spiderweb of regulation? What if every photo I uploaded, every complaint I filed, was feeding some vast database tracking suburban descent? Maybe the Millers were laughing, not because they were smug, but because they knew I was dancing right where they wanted me. But then I would remember the scratches on my Silverado, the lost client account, the look on Rebecca's face when she was late again. And the paranoia would burn away, replaced by cold resolve. Conspiracy or not, this was a fight I had to win. By the start of summer, the war had escalated. A tow truck arrived one afternoon, hooking up Derek's Explorer while he screamed at the officer, red-faced and furious. I stood on my porch, calm as a judge, sipping my coffee. The fine, I learned later, was $325. Insurance sent another letter, this time asking the Millers for documentation of their parking habits. The HOA announced a new policy about parking etiquette, thinly disguised but obviously aimed at them. It was working. The paper weapons were landing, but a part of me knew this was only the beginning. The Millers were stubborn, and bad neighbors do not surrender easily. They would fight back in their way, with louder music, with nastier glares, with more cars blocking more curbs. And maybe, just maybe, the shadowy powers I had unleashed were watching me too, measuring how far I would go. Still, as I turned off the lights one night and glanced out the window to see my driveway finally clear, I felt the first hint of victory. Not the final victory, not yet, but the taste of it was sweet, sharp, and addictive. The war was no longer about a blocked driveway. It was about principle, power, and the strange dance of American suburbia, where bad neighbors meet the crushing weight of the system, and where a man like me discovers just how far he will go to protect his patch of concrete. The first true strike landed on a blistering July afternoon, when I returned from work to see the Millers' Ford Explorer missing from its usual perch across my driveway. For a moment, I thought they had finally learned. Then I noticed the fluorescent orange sticker plastered on the curb. Towed for violation. Contact City Impound. I nearly laughed out loud. After months of notes, phone calls, and sleepless nights, the city had finally wielded its hammer. The fine, according to the notice, was $325 plus towing and storage fees. For Derek, that was probably a week's worth of beer money. For me, it was vindication. But the real beauty was not the tow itself. It was the ripple. Once a car is impounded, records get generated. Records flow into insurance companies. Insurance companies do not like words like violation and impound. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at the Millers' house from their insurer. I did not read it, of course. I only caught the glimpse when Sandy tossed it onto their porch and shouted at Derek about stupid rates. My guess? A premium hike. Maybe hundreds more a year, maybe cancellation. Either way, the wheels of American finance had started grinding against them. I could have stopped there. A tow, a fine, a higher premium. But the Millers had blocked me one too many mornings, cost me one too many accounts, stolen too many hours of peace from my family. This was not just about inconvenience anymore. This was about justice. And justice, in America, often comes stamped in triplicate. I doubled my efforts. Every time they parked near my driveway, I filed a complaint. Every time their dog barked past midnight, I logged a nuisance report. I contacted zoning enforcement about their half-collapsed deck, citing structural hazards. I even discovered an obscure Texas statute requiring proper containment of yard waste. So, I photographed their piles of broken trampoline parts and emailed the city sanitation office. Piece by piece, I turned their household into a case file. The HOA, once useless, suddenly found its backbone. After my barrage of letters and photos, they passed a new curbside courtesy rule with fines attached. I watched with grim delight as Derek crumpled up one of their notices and hurled it into the street, shouting about power-tripping neighbors. The board, of course, doubled down, threatening legal action if violations continued. When bureaucrats smell weakness, they pounce. The financial pain compounded. A neighbor down the block told me the Miller's mortgage company had sent inspectors after receiving complaints about property condition. Inspectors, I learned, were like wolves. Once they sniff decay, they circle and circle. One rumor spread that the Millers had been forced to refinance at a worse rate. I did not confirm it, but I savored the possibility. By late summer, Derek's swagger had dulled. He no longer strutted shirtless in the yard. Sandy still smoked, but her laugh had lost its edge. Their cars appeared less frequently, as if they were trying to dodge tickets. I should have felt satisfied, but a strange paranoia had taken root in me too. Because once you unleash the machine, you start to wonder if you are still the one driving it. I noticed envelopes piling up at my own house too. HOA newsletters, insurance reminders, property tax assessments. Were they watching me now, the same way they watched the Millers? I caught myself imagining shadowy government auditors huddled in a dark room, whispering, "Subject Harris, weaponizing municipal code, monitor closely." I even dreamed one night of a vast underground bunker beneath Dallas City Hall, filled with bureaucrats in gray suits feeding parking complaints into supercomputers, calculating which suburban families to destroy next. Absurd, yes, but the line between absurdity and reality had grown thin in my mind. Still, when the revenge train is rolling, you do not jump off. I filed a claim with the Texas Department of Insurance alleging that repeated blocked access endangered my coverage. Within a month, the Millers received a letter from their insurer demanding documentation of all their parking practices. Imagine trying to prove you park like a saint when half the neighborhood has photos of you straddling driveways. Then came the federal twist. I had written to the Department of Transportation months earlier, half as a joke, asking whether blocked driveways could interfere with emergency egress. To my shock, someone actually responded. A polite email informed me that obstructions to emergency access may fall under federal guidelines for public safety. The words leapt off the screen. Federal guidelines. That was no longer just Dallas or the HOA, that was Washington. I laughed until my sides hurt, imagining Derek explaining to a federal agent why his cousin's Dodge Charger had to rest across my driveway at 7:45 a.m. By autumn, the Millers were drowning. Their Explorer bore fresh scratches from a tow. Their mailbox bulged with envelopes stamped "Notice." Their deck remained half collapsed, flagged with a bright yellow hazard tag from the city. And then, as if the machine wanted a final flourish, their pit bulls became the subject of an animal control investigation after multiple barking complaints. I never admitted to filing those reports, but I smiled when I saw the animal control truck idling out front. The revenge had grown so elaborate it felt less like payback and more like theater. A suburban opera performed in fines, premiums, and certified mail. I played conductor, waving my baton of complaints, while the instruments of City Hall, HOA, insurance, and state law banged away in harmony. And yet, beneath the comedy, there was a real biting satisfaction. The Millers had underestimated me. They thought I was just another neighbor to steamroll. Instead, they had stumbled into the most dangerous enemy in suburban America, a homeowner with time, documentation, and internet access. Sometimes I wondered if I had gone too far. Rebecca raised her eyebrows when I spent nights drafting yet another letter. Ethan shook his head and muttered that I was obsessed. Even Lily asked me once, "Daddy, are you happy when they're sad?" I hugged her, kissed her head, and told her it was not about happiness. It was about fairness. Still, her question lingered. But fairness, in America, often looks like a ledger. Debits and credits. They blocked my driveway. I docked at their bank account. They mocked me at parties. I buried them in fines. Balance restored. The Millers did not host parties anymore. Their music dropped to a whisper. Cars no longer spilled across the curb. In fact, some days I did not see their cars at all, as if they had learned to scatter, to hide, to retreat into the cracks of the system they had once mocked. Victory tasted sharp, almost metallic. I sipped my Bud Light on the porch and watched the street sit empty, peaceful at last. And yet, as the cicadas buzzed and the Texas sun sank red over the rooftops, I could not shake the thought that maybe the Millers were not defeated. Maybe they were regrouping. Maybe in some back room of the insurance world or the mortgage industry, they were filing complaints against me, turning my own weapons back in my direction. I imagined my mailbox one day overflowing with notices addressed to me, each one a mirror of the ones I had sent them. In this suburban war, who could ever be sure who was winning? Still, for that autumn at least, I savored the peace. The driveway was clear, the street was quiet. The bad neighbors, once kings of chaos, now stumbled under the weight of laws they had never bothered to read. And I, a simple homeowner, had discovered that in America, revenge is not about shouting matches or fistfights. It is about paperwork. Cold, relentless, soul-crushing paperwork. By winter, the neighborhood looked different, as if the entire block had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. The Miller house sat quiet most nights, its porch light dim, its yard clutter less chaotic than before. Their explorer had disappeared for weeks at a time. Even the pit bulls barked less, as though they sensed the tension draining away. I would step out in the mornings, coffee steaming in my hand, and see my driveway clear, open mine. That small site, that empty stretch of concrete, felt like victory carved into stone. But victory, I soon learned, is a strange flavor. It is sweet at first, intoxicating, but quickly it curdles into something more complicated. I began noticing the silence too much, staring at their house and wondering what was happening inside. Were they plotting their return? Were they quietly paying fines and licking their wounds? Or had the great American machine I had unleashed, the city, the HOA, the insurance companies, crushed them so thoroughly that they had no fight left? Then the rumors started. A neighbor mentioned overhearing Derek cursing about losing the insurance. Another said Sandy was complaining about a second mortgage. Someone else whispered that the Millers were thinking of moving, maybe back to Oklahoma, where Sandy's family lived. It was all speculation, but speculation in suburbia travels faster than fact. I watched their mailbox fill with envelopes stamped in bold red ink, notices that looked heavy with debt. One night I saw Derek carrying a box to his truck. Just a cardboard box, nothing dramatic. But in that box I saw the possibility of their retreat, their surrender. And I felt something unexpected, pity. They were awful neighbors, yes. They mocked me, blocked me, cost me time, money, dignity. They earned every fine, every hike, every letter. But as Derek dropped that box into the bed of his truck, his shoulders slumped, his swagger gone, I saw not a villain, but a man outmatched by forces he never understood. He had laughed at me for knowing the rules. He had sneered at my complaints. But in America, ignorance of the system is the quickest path to ruin. Rebecca noticed my mood that night. "Are you okay?" she asked, as we sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. I nodded, then shook my head. I won, didn't I? The driveway's clear, the noise is gone, but I don't feel like I thought I would. She reached across, touched my hand. Because it was never just about winning. It was about peace, and peace doesn't always feel like triumph. It just feels quiet. Her words lingered, and for the first time I wondered if I had become too much like the machine I had wielded. I thought of the endless letters, the statutes highlighted in neon, the nights spent hunched over my laptop. Had I lost something of myself in the pursuit of fairness? The bad neighbors had forced me into battle, but had I also volunteered too eagerly for the war? The conspiracy thoughts returned, half joking, half serious. What if this was the plan all along? The government creates bad neighbors as pressure valves, testing how much the middle class will endure before turning into amateur lawyers. Insurance companies salivate when people like me flood their files with risk reports. HOA boards love nothing more than a righteous complaint to justify their existence. Maybe I had not beaten the system at all. Maybe I had fed it exactly what it wanted. More paper, more fees, more compliance. I chuckled to myself one night, imagining a secret federal office in Washington called the Department of Suburban Harmony. I pictured agents in black suits watching my block on satellite feeds, checking off boxes. Subject Harris, successfully activated. Millers, neutralized through financial attrition. Experiment continues. Perhaps my victory was just another line in their hidden report. The thought should have unsettled me. Instead, it made me laugh. After all, if suburban life had taught me anything, it was that truth and absurdity often shared a driveway. Still, the practical result could not be denied. By December, the Millers put up a for sale sign, bright, white, undeniable. I stood on my porch that evening staring at it, Bud Light in hand, feeling a mix of triumph and melancholy. They were leaving. The bad neighbors from hell, who had blocked me, mocked me, and nearly broken me, were packing up. A month later, a moving truck arrived. I watched as box after box disappeared into its cavernous back. Sandy lit one last cigarette on the porch, exhaled into the cold air, and flicked the butt into the yard. Derek slammed the truck door, his face hard, his eyes darting once toward me. For a moment our gazes locked. No words passed between us. What could either of us say? Then they drove off, their pit bulls howling in the truck bed, their house left behind like a battlefield scar. The street exhaled. Neighbors came out of their houses, nodding at me, some even clapping me on the back. One older man whispered, "You did it. You got rid of them." I smiled, nodded, but inside I wondered if I truly had. Did I get rid of them, or did the system I had unleashed decide it was time? Either way, the result was the same: peace. Life returned to normal, or at least the suburban version of normal. My driveway stayed clear. Rebecca drove to school without stress. Ethan found his confidence again, parking and backing out like any other teenager. Lily smiled more, the word bully fading from her vocabulary. The house felt lighter, the air less heavy. And yet sometimes I still caught myself glancing at the empty Miller house, half expecting them to return, half missing the strange energy they brought. Conflict, after all, is its own kind of fuel. Months later, a new family moved in. Quiet, polite, 2 kids in college, no loud parties, no trampolines in the yard. They waved when they saw us, offered cookies when they settled in, and parked their cars neatly in their own driveway. In every measurable sense, they were the neighbors you dream of. But sometimes, late at night, I would sit on the porch, stare at the clear curb, and feel the ghost of the war I had fought. The silence was welcome, but it was also eerie. I had faced down bad neighbors and discovered not just their weakness, but my own capacity for obsession, cunning, and vengeance. The lesson, I suppose, is simple but sharp. In America, you do not always defeat bad neighbors with yelling or fists or even reason. You defeat them with the slow, grinding gears of law, finance, and bureaucracy. You turn the same machine that taxes you, insures you, and regulates you into your ally. And once unleashed, it does not stop until balance is restored. But you also learn that victory carries its own cost. Peace feels empty when you have lived so long on the adrenaline of conflict. As I sit here now, the spring sun rising over a quiet Dallas street, my driveway clear, my Silverado gleaming, I realize the war is over. The Millers are gone. The block is calm. And yet somewhere deep inside me, a part of me still listens for the rumble of a muffler, the screech of tires too close to my curb, the mocking laugh of a neighbor who thought the rules did not apply. Maybe one day it will happen again, with someone new. Maybe the cycle never ends. But if it does, I know this much. The next bad neighbors will not just be facing me. They will be facing the entire invisible machine I have already learned to wield. And that, in its own strange way, is the most American lesson of all.